I think people know the South has something to say, but I think there's still a conceptual gap between knowing the South has something to say and knowing how to hear it.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Corey Miles, a professor at Tulane University, whose work delves into black southern culture. That was his voice you heard at the top. He's the editor of a great new issue of the journal Southern Cultures, focused on the importance of Southern hip-hop. That's right, we're going to get in the weeds a little on what the South signifies in hip-hop, what it brings to the party, and how it connects to black Southern history and narratives. And if that's not enough arts and culture for you, in our usual arts and culture segment, we will talk about a celebration this past weekend that marked an important event in the history of Atlanta's LGBTQ rights movement. It has been called the Southern Stonewall. And what does it have to do with Andy Warhol? We'll talk about that. But first, we have our weekly news roundup. And this week, we need to talk about what everyone is talking about when it comes to Southern politics, gerrymandering in Texas. As you've probably heard, the Texas legislature is back in action for a special session called by Governor Greg Abbott. And the top priority for the state's Republicans is a redistricting plan that aims to carve up 5 existing Democratic congressional seats so that they can be won by Republicans in 2026. The unusual effort comes at the urging of, no surprise, President Donald Trump, who is trying to hold on to a slim Republican majority in the House of Representatives. By federal law, states are required to update their district maps every 10 years after each U.S. census. Texas did that in 2021, like every other state. But there's nothing forbidding states from redistricting more often, and Texas in particular has done it mid-decade before. In 2003, just after Republicans took control of the state legislature, they redrew the state's congressional maps and picked up 6 seats. The proposed map introduced by Texas Republicans last week, if adopted by the legislature, could add another 5 by breaking up districts currently represented by Democrats into more Republican-friendly configurations. Republicans currently hold 25 of Texas's 38 congressional seats, or 66% of the seats, in a state where Trump won 56% of the vote last year. If they added another 5, they would have 79% of the delegation, just a massive partisan overrepresentation. That would make Texas stand out even in the South, but only by degree. Republicans are overrepresented in Congress relative to their state's presidential votes in every southern state but Virginia, the only one with Democratic majorities in its state legislature. Republicans control 104 out of 148 congressional seats across the 12 southern states, 70% of the total. In 2024, Trump won a cumulative 58% of the vote across those states. Now, presidential results are not necessarily perfect indicators of a state's overall partisan leanings, but they're as good a proxy as we have. And if southern states' congressional representation reflected their presidential preferences, Republicans would have 19 fewer seats across the South, which could obviously make a big difference in a Congress where they currently have just a 7-seat majority. So what form do these discrepancies take? They vary, with some states more egregious than others. For example, in Arkansas, all 4 congressional seats are currently held by Republicans. But Trump won 64% of the vote there last year, not 100%. The closest you could get to accurate partisan representation in a 4-member delegation would be for one of those districts to be held by a Democrat. So Republicans have a net +1 in the state. In Georgia, a state Trump won barely with 51% of the vote last year, after losing it in 2020, Republicans hold 9 out of 14 House seats, a 64% majority. A representative breakdown would obviously be 7 seats for each party, meaning the GOP has gerrymandered itself 2 bonus seats. In Tennessee, where Trump won 64% of the vote, Republicans hold 8 out of 9 seats, an 89% majority, and another 2-seat Republican bonus. Tennessee Republicans boosted that number by 1 seat in their last redistricting by cracking very blue Nashville and splitting it among 3 different House districts, each with a majority from the city's predominantly Republican suburban counties. That's a strategy the new proposed Texas map also uses. It would concentrate Austin's heavily Democratic constituency in 1 district rather than 2, forcing current Democratic incumbent representatives Lloyd Doggett and Greg Casar into the same district. Doggett, who has been in office since 1995, has been through this circus before. His district was redrawn in the 2003 special session. Casar, who is only in his 2nd term, has emerged as one of Congress's leading progressive voices in the South. Here's what he had to say last week about the proposed maps, calling out both Trump and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton.
Donald Trump is the most corrupt president in American history, and Ken Paxton is the most corrupt politician in Texas history. And this is these 2 men teaming up to try to ram through this ridiculous and illegal gerrymandering plan. It's the same old BS. Corrupt politicians having a scheme to rig the rules of our elections so that they can drown out voters' voices and remain unaccountable.
Texas may not be the only southern state to try to squeeze even more Republican seats out of its district maps. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has said he might ask his own Republican-dominated legislature to do the same. Florida already has a huge GOP tilt in its congressional delegation. Republicans hold 20 of the state's 28 seats, a 71% majority in a state where Trump won 56% of the votes last year. The most common defense among conservatives to complaints about gerrymandering is that the other side does it too. And they're right to an extent. To take the 2 largest blue states, Democrats are overrepresented in the congressional delegations of California and New York. Even though both states have some form of nonpartisan district drawing, they have still produced lopsided Democratic majorities. In California, Kamala Harris won 58% of the vote last year, but Democrats control 43 of 52 congressional seats, an 83% majority. In New York, Harris won 56% of the vote, but Democrats hold 19 of 26 congressional seats, a 73% majority. Governors of both states, along with Illinois, New Jersey, and some others, have said that they would consider their own special sessions for redistricting if Texas proceeds with its plans. Now, in the big picture, you could argue that all of the state-by-state partisan gerrymanders more or less cancel each other out. Republicans currently hold 50.5% of the seats in the House of Representatives, within a sliver of the 49.8% of the vote that Trump won last year nationwide. It would be hard to argue that that isn't representative of the country's voters as a whole. But the endless cycles of partisan gerrymandering have severe distorting effects on our states. It is not true that Florida is 71% Republican, or Kentucky 83%, or South Carolina 86%, as their congressional delegations would suggest. The result of these cynical political maps is the deliberate disenfranchisement of many millions of people. They undermine the fundamental idea of representative democracy, that it is supposed to be representative. And they embolden purely partisan political leaders who feel free to ignore the actual needs and priorities of their constituents. Interestingly, 2 southern states at opposite ends of the region's ideological spectrum offer alternative models. In Virginia, a swing state that leans blue, congressional districts are drawn by a 16-member commission. 8 members are from the state legislature, 4 from each party, and 8 are citizen appointees. Perhaps as a result, the state currently has the most actually representative congressional delegation of any southern state. Trump won 46% of the vote in Virginia last year, and Republicans won 5 out of 11, or 45%, of its congressional seats. More problematic, but still illustrative, is Alabama. It is hard these days to get a congressional district map thrown out by a federal court. The U.S. Supreme Court has narrowed the reach of the 1965 Voting Rights Act such that courts tend to find fault only with egregious racial district drawing, with the clear aim of disenfranchising racial minorities. But Alabama, which, of course, like most southern states, has a long history of racist voting restrictions, managed to fall afoul of that rule and had its initial 2021 district map thrown out on the grounds that it discriminated against black voters. A subsequent map in 2023 was also blocked by a federal court, which ended up drawing its own map in 2024, creating a second black-majority congressional district in the state. The result was the election of Democratic Representative Shamari Figurs, which means 2 of Alabama's 7 congressional seats are now held by Democrats. That gives Republicans 5 seats for a 71% majority, not too far from the 65% of votes that Trump won there last year. So you could say the protections of the Voting Rights Act worked as intended in this case, allowing for more equal representation. But under a 2019 Supreme Court ruling, judges don't interfere with gerrymandering for partisan rather than explicitly racial purposes, something Texas lawmakers were clearly aware of in drawing their new proposed map. Of the 5 redrawn districts, 4 have Hispanic majorities, which could make it hard for Democrats to claim racial discrimination. The net effect of all of this, of course, is to still further reduce the representation in Congress of progressive voices in the South. Okay, now we're to my interview with Corey Miles. Corey is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology and Africana Studies program at Tulane University. His research interests are situated at the nexus of black performativity and carcerality, with a regional focus on the U.S. South. He investigates how surveillance and policing are technologies that fuel the structure of the U.S. South, and the ways black aesthetics has challenged the assumptions of this structure. He's the author of the book Vibe, The Sound and Feeling of Black Life in the American South, published by the University Press of Mississippi. It maps the ways the South itself is a site of carcerality, confinement, imprisonment, punishment, and how trap music is used as a space to contest and make sense of emotional and spatial violence. And he is the guest editor of the latest issue of Southern Cultures magazine, a journal published by the University of North Carolina Press. It's a great magazine, if you're not familiar with it, bringing scholarly perspectives to a wide range of Southern life. This issue is all about Southern hip-hop, what it says, what it means, and how it has served as a vital cultural text for the past 40 years. You can read it for free online. I'll put a link in the show notes. And my conversation with Corey will give you at least some idea of the ground that it covers. I sat down to talk with him during my visit to New Orleans last month. So, Seth, let's go to the tape.
Pushing rhymes underground like moonshine, with jump like juke joints, ride like old legs, down like faux flex, shine like gold grills, cars and chrome rings. But you know what it is.
And I am so happy that Corey Miles is joining us for the conversation. Thanks a lot for dropping by.
No. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for an invitation.
So I wanted to start by just asking you a little bit about your own background. I certainly gather from your work and what you've written in this issue of Southern Cultures that you grew up kind of steeped in Southern culture and in Southern hip-hop in particular. But where are you from? And kind of how did you get into doing the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I'm from Weldon, North Carolina. It's a rural, tiny town in northeast North Carolina. And growing up, so I graduated high school in 2008. And so in my imagination, I just liked hip hop, to where I think I came of age in a moment where Southern hip hop was like center stage in the hip hop world. And so I don't know if I knew then I had a distinction or a frame of reference, because everything I listened to was Southern hip hop. So Southern hip hop was just kind of default hip hop for my imagination. And I was the first person in my family to go to university. And when I'm studying and I'm reading how academics talk about the South, talk about music, talk about blackness, it was like an obvious gap, to where hip hop studies was talking largely about the East and West Coast, particularly largely about what we might call conscious hip hop. So hip hop with like a obvious political meaning. Sociologists that were studying black people were studying black people in major cities. And so it was a glaring gap where we know little about what do black people in the South, particularly from rural people, what does their day-to-day life sound like? So what music is like structuring their reality. And so for me, I had life experience that told me it was already a bunch of data, right, that can fill these gaps. And that's kind of what early in my career just jump started, just seeing not even just an erasure, but just like a lack of attentiveness to just kind of what rural Southern Black people just experience and just how they live day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm older than you, and so I grew up on, sort of old school New York hip hop, and then when suddenly there was California hip hop, that was kind of like a novelty, like, oh, they have hip hop on the West Coast too, and honestly, it was arrested development for me, and maybe for a lot of people, that opened a little bit of a door, and it was this reminder that, of course, so much of Black American culture originates in the South, and certainly Black American music. I mean, we know that about the blues, we know it about jazz, and hip hop has sort of been left out of that equation. In this issue of Southern cultures, you start out by quoting, and I think it's also quoted in a couple of other essays, the line that Andre 3000 had at I think it was the 95 Source Awards, where they were, Outkast was named the best new act, and there was a lot of booing in the audience because at that point people weren't taking Southern hip hop seriously. And he came up on stage and said, "The South's got something to say." On its face, that was kind of staking a claim that, Southern hip hop is something worth paying attention to. But I guess, why do you think that line resonated, and why does it resonate 30 years later to the extent that it's quoted multiple times in this journal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and so I'm 5 years old at the moment, but even so when I remember from my childhood, I think even as a young person, right, who's now getting like an entry point into media and really understand, and not really a strong understanding of like regional differences, but even without, I guess, like a deep intellectual analysis of it, I think one reason it stuck so hard because it's simplicity, right? It's the notion that this region has something to say, that this region has people who live, breathe, and think. And what comes with that, right, is certain types of articulations and ideas and desires. And to see in this moment, like Source Awards may be the most respected place of Black media. And then to see, one, how hip hop had to push to become mainstream, but then this added layer of regionality where the idea that Southernness gets mapped on Southern Black people in particular ways where, they're just kind of this idea of being slow, regressive, backwards, to where how we see Black people map those things on Southern Black people, and this notion that, we have style, flavor here too. And I think for me, the simplicity of it, right, does this type of one, right, creating this crevice that you're going to listen to me, but it also, right, when you're, I don't know if I can curse, but I was going to say, when your shit is good, you don't need a long description, right? We just got something to say. And so for me, I think that's why it resonated so well.
You can definitely curse. We're on a podcast. It's okay. Yeah. Well, and so how did this issue come about in terms of your engagement with it and becoming, being the guest editor for it? And then as you kind of engaged with it, what did you want to do? What were you thinking about? What were the threads that you wanted to try to pull together with it? Because it's a big field, Southern hip hop.
Yeah. And so Regina Bradley, who I think is like not an OG, but right, the intellectual archetype of a Southern hip hop studies, invited me on to be the guest editor, and under the idea that it's 30 years since, right, Dre made that statement at the Source Awards. And so for me, I wanted it to do this type of chronicling where we are today and those differences, while also showing that what would the South look and sound like if we entered it through, right, hip hop. And so part of what I wanted to do is to kind of think about, do we know the South differently through hip hop that other pieces of Southernness don't get us. Um, and so for me, I'll start the special issue with the story of in South Africa in Cape Town. And I go on Long Street, which essentially has like a lot of bars. And so you can just walk down the street and you can hear the music that's in the bars and in the clubs. And the one I go into essentially plays Southern hip hop the entire night, to where, and so in my imagination, so the idea is that they're not just playing American music, they're playing, right, Southern Black American music. And that's what like what I started to realize a lot of places were playing. And so for me, I'm thinking about how when Dre says the South has something to say, I think writing about Southern hip hop 30 years later, I'm trying to grapple with the idea that after Southern hip hop, at least in my opinion, kind of takes center stage in hip hop, from inspiring how other regions sounds and to just like through record sales. And so for me, I'm thinking about that's different, right? To where I think people know the South has something to say, but I think there's still a conceptual gap between knowing the South has something to say and knowing how to hear it. And so I'm in the issue that I'm trying then, what sets of skills does the listener need to hear something different? And then so if we take trap music, songs heavily about drug dealing, violence, what sets of ideological tools would a person need to hear love, to hear care, to hear compassion, to hear kind of beyond the guns and drugs? We get like mumble rap. It's like kind of a frame to put on Southern people, particularly because like the Southern drawl, particularly because like certain styles, whereas like, it's difficult like to hear the voices. Southern Black rappers sometimes rap with grills in their mouth, so like the word is slurred. And so thinking about mumble rap not as necessarily an insult, but how does this connect us to a longer tradition about what does it mean to listen beyond like sociability? Is there some type of intellectual reasoning or history behind maybe the slurring of words to where I can communicate with this person and this other person can hear us, but they really won't know what's going on? And so for me, it's trying to just say in 2025, it's obvious that the world listens to the South, but I'm not sure if they're listening quite right. And so I wanted to get to that in the issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And I think it's really interesting the way between the different contributors, it comes at it from several different angles. You have the piece on Big Crit, which I thought did a great job of, and it's also very timely now because of, the recent success of Sinners and everything has suddenly gotten everybody digging back into Mississippi blues. But the way that piece connects Big Crit's music to, that is the home of the blues, and that he also himself brought B.B. King onto one of his tracks, like making this very literal connection that I think, and maybe this is a generational thing, I think in the early years of hip hop, there were a lot of probably blues and jazz fans who kind of didn't want to hear it, and maybe didn't necessarily see the way that it connected to those kind of older roots. But you have that, and then you also have the very compelling first-person story. I'm sorry, I don't remember the writer's name, who grew up listening to hip-hop and then went into and ended up going into drug dealing, ended up in prison, and that the music served for him as kind of a I don't know exactly, a North Star in some ways, but he makes an interesting case that it's not that the music sort of glorified a lifestyle to him. It's that this was the actual reality he was in, and it did provide a cultural map of sorts.
Yes, that's from an essay by an artist, writer, who's recently released from prison, Chris Young. And in the essay, he has this cool line where he says, in the hood, we don't have social safety nets, but we have music. And exactly what you're chronicling, and Chris's essay is so fascinating because the essay is itself, right, kind of shouting out Southern hip hop, and the sentences are largely lines and song titles from music. And people familiar with Southern hip hop, like, oh yeah, I know what song that is. I know what song that is. And he's kind of then etching or kind of almost building like this literary quilt with these Southern hip hop songs to tell the story about his younger life with music, with hustling, with incarceration. And what does it mean then to find beauty and to make art in the wake of all of that? And I think Chris is an example, right, to where how we strip hip hop, Southern hip hop in particular, of creative genius, to where if a song reads and says guns, drugs, violence, right, we take it as like an avocation for violence in a way that a horror film, we don't accuse horror film directors of advocating for violence. But what we know is that certain types of articulations are made possible just through different genre structures. And so horror films use violence as a type of genre structure. And I think what Chris is saying is Southern hip hop, trap music in particular, the structure is guns, drugs, metaphorically. But to actually know what the story is about, you have to, right, go beyond just the structural template and kind of listen clearly to what the story is navigating. But that would demand us to actually believe that particularly poor people in the hood can communicate through meta narratives, that they can say multiple things, say something and mean multiple things at one time, that we might actually have to be trained on how to listen to the music. So I took a music class in college. I would play like Beethoven in my car, but after having taken that class, I have a greater appreciation of what Beethoven does because I got trained how to hear it. And I think Chris is then putting the pressure on us listeners. We might need some type of training, right, to kind of recalibrate how can we hear beyond, right, just the guns and drugs.
Another thing that comes up, I think it's in the roundtable discussion, is the sort of dual nature of Southern hip hop, that it has both inherently a little bit of a country side to it, but all of or most of the great Southern hip hop that we think of actually comes from the urban areas. It comes from Atlanta and New Orleans and Memphis and all over the South. Can you talk a little bit about what does country mean in the context of Southern hip hop?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think there's debates between different artists, different scholars about what that term means. And so, as a Black person from the rural South, for me, country points to both Southernness and rurality in a way that some people would imagine country functionally similarly to Southernness, that you can be country in the urban centers in the South. And part of what I think comes from the round table is, right, to kind of frustrate our language on how we talk about what do we mean when we say country, what do we mean when we say Southern. And so for me, if I'm thinking with the round table, they give us this dope line where it says it's a difference between something just being in the South and being of the South. And so I think about countryness in that way, to where it's a distinction between being in the country, so like a really rural place, and being of the country. And so for me, I think when I'm thinking about what does it mean to be country, particularly in the South, I'm thinking about certain type of sensibilities, certain type of touch points, to where even if I live in the urban center of Atlanta, my grandma who raised me could be from, right, Albany or maybe Warner Robins, and how her sensibilities shape me in a way that I can be of this place. I can be country and have a type of countryness to me, even if I'm in an urban center. And so for me, I think country is leaning into particularly Southern rural sensibilities that actually take shape in places outside the South and outside of country spaces. But I think is leaning into a type of sensibility. At the core of it is thinking about where is home, And what are those small, intimate pieces that make home home? So it's demanding me to look beyond the big buildings, look beyond kind of just the political architecture of a place, but what are those intimate things about a place? And for me, I think countryness becomes something grounded in that.
And do you think that was part of the resistance, or the way that sort of, New York hip hop and LA hip hop looked down on Southern hip hop to a certain degree when it emerged, because there has, in those places, people, many of whose families probably came from the South, left the South at some point in the past, and they think of the South as sort of like a more, kind of backwards place that they left and got away from. Do you think that made it, was that part of what made it hard for people to hear it at first?
Yeah, and Regina Bradley does this in her book where she's talking about how particularly hip hop, Southern hip hop in particular, right? And again, it is in the wake of a post-civil rights era, to where this notion of respectability is central to how Black people are trying to forge belonging in this country. And Southernness, poorness, right, when mapped on the Black people, is almost inherently almost anti-respectability in kind of how we imagine what does a model citizen look like. And so the idea that we migrate north and have different economic opportunities, and how then the South can, in our imagination, be connected to a type of pastness. So we think about the South, the Black South in the past tense. And also, and I think if I'm thinking about it globally, where the United States imagines or draws the South out to be, say, the seat of race, to where the South itself is backwards. That's where racism happens, as a way in which to excuse how racism is embedded within the structure of a country. And so the South becomes kind of a scapegoat for, right, a racist history that structures this country. And then I think those together, then we have an image of Southernness that doesn't actually coincide with how Southern Black people exist. And it's an interesting essay that's not in the print culture, but it's going to be published in the own side one. And it's about Jay-Z's Down South roots. So about how Jay-Z's image, so even the idea of Hove, H-O-V, the hustler of Virginia, to where Jay-Z cites Southernness being central to, right, his becoming of a person, becoming of a thinker. And then so part of what the issue is also doing is frustrating geographical boundaries, to where even though we can say hip hop, right, founded in New York, but the music genres that New Yorkers were pulling from was inherently Southern music genres. That exactly what you mentioned about the migration patterns, the people who made migration possible as Black Southerners. And so I think the issue in Southern hip hop studies in general wants to kind of frustrate these binaries about, can you be both slow and fast simultaneously? In the Big Crit essay, can I be mainstream and underground at the exact same time? And Southern hip hop gives us a language that kind of pushes back against, right, these either ors.
I also wanted to ask you about, because your work, a lot of it focuses on the idea and the reality of carcerality, and especially in the South. You talk about the phrase trap music and how that kind of resonates. And I think at this point, we might have reached a point with trap where it's become so secondhand that people don't even really always think about what the origin of the phrase was. They just think, oh, it's a beat that sounds like this, or it's about drug dealing or whatever. What does that represent? I mean, that's a pretty powerful word, trap music.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be a trap music gatekeeper today. In part, I think trap music has just become synonymous, yes, with a type of hip hop that if they rap about drugs, if it sounds kind of upbeat, hard hitting, then it's trap music. Well, I've seen essays and articles about trap music that doesn't talk about the South. in the issue, I talk about events like trap yoga or trap karaoke, and it's really just kind of contemporary hip hop. So in theory, anyone could make a trap song, right? Sonically. But for me, I think the more intimate pieces of what trap music does for me is beyond kind of the song itself. It's beyond the lyrics about drug dealing. It's beyond the hi-hats and the heavy bass. But it's about certain Southern sensibilities that were in a genesis of trap music is literally trying to imitate what does it sound like to hustle and to turn $5 into $25. And it's trying to imitate that sound, particularly in Southern spaces that just doesn't have the geographical structure of, say, of North Carolina. Of a New York. So the trap can only manifest in the South just because the geographical structure is different than up north. And so for me, then I think trap music, beyond kind of the instrumentation and the lyrics, always leans back on those Southern sensibilities. And again, right, I think non-Southerners can do that, can embrace Southern sensibilities and do it. But for me, trap music is going to have the hi-hats, the heavy bass, the 808s. It's going to think about struggle and kind of hustling by any means necessary. And then those things then, and this is me quoting Zandra Robinson, has to then wave at the blues tradition in some way. To where if the blues piece isn't engaged, then for me it's not trap. It's just like a type of like contemporary hip hop.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know?
That both the blues and trap music arose out of specific circumstances and really out of struggles, right?
Mm-hmm.
The struggles of daily life, but very particular struggles in particular places.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think the last thing I'd like to ask you is a lot of the issue, it's looking back over this 30-year period. And of course, there was this, super fertile era from sort of the mid 90s into the mid 2000s where Southern hip hop just absolutely dominated the United States, dominated the world, like you're talking about. And there have continued to be. I mean, there's still an awful lot of music coming out of the South, obviously. What's your take on Southern hip hop now? And also, who are your favorite contemporary Southern hip hop artists?
See, I should have got these questions beforehand.
Yeah.
I need to, this is, I really love it though. Recently, I reviewed an essay for an article to be a peer-reviewed article. And it was about trap music in China. And I learned about how trap music, particularly artists from Memphis and Atlanta, are really huge in China, so much so that the government wanted to stomp it out, but now is trying then to take these Chinese trap rappers and incorporate them, right, to have them kind of make songs that are like pro the government that kind of supports. And it's really interesting way, and thinking about that in context of your question about what is Southern hip hop today, to where we can imitate accent sounds, we get access to each other in ways that when I'm coming of age, that access just isn't as instant. And so then I think the way I'm thinking about the question is, what is the thing that can't be copied? So maybe like an essence or maybe a type of sincerity. But so if anyone theoretically can produce songs that sound what I imagine Southern hip hop to sound, what's that thing, that essence of the thing that makes this Southern hip hop? And so for me, that's going to be rooted in, does these songs sincerely speak to the touchstones that make the South the South? Does the song produce a conversation between people who live and breathe in the South? And so for me, it's more in the conversation itself. So between, what is that conversation between the audience and the song? And I think the South is that conversation. Like, that's, to me, that's Southern hip hop. And younger people are innovative, and they're doing things now that they're like, I think I listened to like 2008 to 2000 12 hip hop the most. And so, and the interesting part is I'm not sure what Southern hip hop is going to sound or feel like 5 years from now. But I will hope that the younger people are carrying a tradition in a way that even if I don't like the song, I vibe with it because, this song speaks to the region and my home. And now I think artists such as, I think like Doechii, okay, Black women are running Southern hip hop. That's just kind of like the reality of it now. So like Doechii, Meg Thee Stallion, Glorilla, to where I think that is to me what Southern hip hop is at this moment. It's this kind of reckoning with these gendered ideas about what does it mean when women rap about scamming men? What does it mean if we don't think about, say, drug dealing as a completely masculine thing? And that reshapes what is toxic masculinity. Is it just rapping about guns? Does that hold up when women do it too, and sometimes do it better? And so for me, currently, Glorilla, Doechii, I love her line, I'm the trap Madonna. I have no idea what that means. It's captivating. And so for me, I think seeing young Black girls, communicate themselves in ways that don't fall back on respectability and having different entry points into what does it mean to be a young Black girl who can be beautiful, who can be strong, who can be dangerous all simultaneously. And I think that's the beauty in what's going on today.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great point. And you included, I know, a Doechii track on your playlist, which I'll link to in the show notes. But you put together sort of a short primer of Southern hip hop to go along with the magazine. All right. Well, thanks so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it. And as a longtime hip hop fan and Southern hip hop fan, I think this issue of Southern cultures is just terrific, and you brought in a lot of really thoughtful voices, and I think given the music the due that it deserves. Thanks very much.
No, and thank you for having me, and for all the work you're doing across the South. To me, that's why it was a no-brainer to show up, because I appreciate all that you're doing. And thank you for allowing me to be a small part of it.
Well, thanks again.
It was a late Sunday when the drama went down. Players smoking on blunts, players sipping on Crown, players all around. These GTs, cause we looking sexy in our spandex dresses, and we chilling on the Lexus, kicking it with some homies from uptown, letting us know some drama.
Just as a note, the music clips we heard at the start and end of the interview were Live from the Underground by Big Crit and Mama's Hurting by Ghetto Twins. Both are on Corey's Southern Hip Hop playlist, which you should absolutely listen to. See the link in the show notes. Okay, from hip-hop to Warhol. A screening of an Andy Warhol movie in Atlanta this past weekend, August 1st and 2nd, had particular resonance. The movie was Lonesome Cowboys, Warhol's queer Western satire from 1968. The screening was sponsored by Atlanta Pride, the local LGBTQ advocacy group, which is marking its 55th anniversary this year. And Lonesome Cowboys is a key part of that history. In August 1969, the film was seized by Atlanta police from a screening at a theater in Ansley Mall, an open-air shopping district that at the time was a hub of Atlanta gay life. The theater was known for showing independent films, including some with gay themes or characters. Police detained everyone at the screening, arresting some for charges including public indecency and drug possession. Atlanta's police chief told the media that the raid was intended to round up, quote, known homosexuals, unquote. The raid came just a few weeks after the Stonewall riots in New York, and it prompted protests in the following days. Most significantly, it led to the formation of the Georgia Gay Liberation Front, the state's first gay rights advocacy group. Within a few years, the group was organizing protest marches, and in 1972, it held the first Atlanta Pride Parade and Festival. Abby Drew, one of the 70 or so people in attendance at the 1969 screening that was raided, told Smithsonian Magazine in 2019 that, quote, I truly believe the Lonesome Cowboys raid was the spark that ignited the Atlanta homosexual population. If you missed the celebratory showing this past weekend, you can find the movie on YouTube, also linked in the show notes. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. We'll talk to you soon.